For 53 long years, we have watched the Knicks and we have waited. We waited as the memory of Willis Reed winning the championship on one leg grew fainter and fainter. We waited as Clyde came up clutch again and again. As John Starks dunked on Jordan and Patrick Ewing dunked on the Pacers. As Bernard King scored 60. As Charles Oakley pulled every rebound within reach. As Spike got in Reggie Miller's face. As Allen Houston put up a shot against Miami that hung in the air for an eternity. As Larry Johnson gave us the 4-point play heard around New York. As Starbury traded threes with Kobe and then sold sneakers every kid could afford. As Nate Robinson stuffed Yao Ming. As the city came alive watching Linsanity. And as Melo lived every Brooklyn dreams when he came home and made MSG feel like the center of the universe once again. We waited without ever knowing if this day would come, and we waited because we knew deep down in our sick, suffering hearts that it would. New York City, this team has done it. The New York Knicks are NBA champions.
All right, stay with me. 53 years. That's how long the New York Knicks went without a championship. Not a bad stretch, not a rough patch. 53 years. For context, the last time Knicks won a title, gas was 39 cents a gallon. Nixon was president, and the idea of a phone in your pocket was science fiction. And in that 53 years, this team did everything wrong. They tanked for stars and miss. They paid for stars and watched them detonate. They changed free agents and got left at the altar. Twice. In the same summer, by two guys who picked a team that was playing in the neighborhood over. This is a franchise that has been studied as a cautionary tale, a punchline, the blueprint for how not to run an NBA team. If the function was a banner, the Knicks would have hung it from the rafters decades ago. But on June 13th, 2026, in San Antonio, Jalen Brunson found his father in the chaos and cried like a man who finally put down something he'd been carrying his whole life. Because the Knicks are champions. So today, we're not doing the usual video. We're not asking why they can't figure it out. We're asking the opposite question. After 53 years of getting it wrong, how did they finally get it right? Founded in 1946, one of the NBA's original franchises, 2 championships before this one, 1970 and 1973, both led by Willis Reed and Walt Frazier. And then nothing for over a half century. From 2001 to 2022, the Knicks made the playoffs 5 times. 5 in 21 years. They play in the most famous arena in basketball, Madison Square Garden, the Mecca, and the biggest media market on earth, with a fan base willing to pay more for a ticket than most people pay for rent. And for most of that time, none of it mattered. Because on the court, it was a punchline with courtside seating. The Knicks were the only team where buying a season ticket felt less like a purchase and more like a hostage situation when you renew every year out of loyalty. So before we talk about how they won, we have to talk about exactly how far down they had to climb. Because this wasn't a team that was just unlucky. This was a team that built the function into science. Every cursed franchise has a moment that explains everything that came out. For the Knicks, it's 2005. Isaiah Thomas, Hall of Fame point guard, first-time team president, trades a package built around future first-round value to acquire Eddy Curry, a 22-year-old center from the Bulls with one good season under his belt in a hard condition Chicago wasn't comfortable with risking. Isaiah hands him a 6-year, $60 million contract. Curry has exactly one productive season as a Knick, then falls apart. Weight issue, conditioning problems, off-court troubles, and the Knicks is left paying max money for a player who appeared in 0 playoff games across his entire Knicks tenure. Imagine paying a full price for a Netflix subscription, and the only thing that ever loads is the loading screen. Isaiah goes on to coach the team too, because why not centralize all the decision making into one guy who clearly needs a second option? And the Knicks go 56 and 108 combined across 2 seasons. That's not a rebuild, that's a structural collapse with a meteor roll. And here's the part that matters for later. Isaiah Thomas was finally removed only after years of public pressure, fan revolts, and a franchise reputation in the gutter. Because the first thing we learned about the old Knicks, they didn't fail quietly, they failed loudly, expensively, in front of everyone. Now, we get to the era that defines an entire generation of Knicks fans. February 2011, after a years-long, full-blown soap opera known as the melodrama, the Knicks finally lands Carmelo Anthony in a 13-player trade with Denver and Minnesota. The cost: Wilson Chandler, Danilo Gallinari, Timothy Mozgov, Raymond Felton, and multiple draft picks. Some of those picks eventually turned into players like Zach LaVine and Pascal Siakam wearing other teams' jerseys. But none of that matters in the moment, because New York finally had its star. The hometown kid, born in Brooklyn, coming to save the franchise. And for about a year, it actually worked, sort of. Then came the strangest 2 weeks in Knicks history. February 2012, Melo hurt. Amari Stoudemire is out grieving his brother. And an undrafted Harvard kid sleeping on his brother's couch named Jeremy Lin gets thrown into a starting lineup out of pure necessity. Linsanity, a global phenom, the Knicks win 7 straight. Lin drops 38 points on Kobe Bryant and the Lakers. For 2 weeks, Madison Square Garden is the center of the basketball universe. And the strangest part, their best stretch happened while their $100 million superstar was on the bench in the city. That's the Knicks in one sentence. The most magical moment happens by accident. But Lin leaves for Houston that summer. Knicks could match the offer. They didn't. And just like that, the magic's gone. Melo's best season comes in 2012-2013 season. 54 wins, an All-NBA campaign, and their only playoff series win in 15 years. Then comes Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson, 11 championship rings as a coach, takes over as team president and convinced he can install the same triangle offense that built dynasties in Chicago and LA. There's just one problem. He signs Melo to a 5-year, $125 million contract extension with no trade clause, and then almost immediately decides Melo doesn't fit his system. For 3 years, Jackson publicly criticized his own franchise player, tweets digs at him, tells reporters Melo would be better off somewhere else, while having handed him a contract that legally prevented anyone from trading him without his permission. That's like hiring someone, giving them a contract you can't get out of, and then complaining about them in the company newsletter. Jackson Knicks goes 17, 32, and 31 wins across his 3 full seasons, worse than the team he inherited. And here's the detail that most fans forget. The agent representing Melo through that entire saga, the trade talks, the no trade clause, and the slow public unraveling was a guy named Leon Rose. Hold on to that name, because we're going to need it later. Melo gets traded to Oklahoma City in September 2017, closing out 6 years that started with a parade-worthy trade and ended in a relationship so broken that the team president was tweeting subliminals at his own star. Now we're arrived at the lowest point, the year that made everything else look survivable by comparison, the 2018-2019 season. The Knicks finished 17-65, the worst record in basketball. And for once, it's not just bad luck, it's on purpose. New York fully commits to the tank, betting everything on landing the number 1 pick and the consistent best prospect in the decade, Duke phenom Zion Williamson. Except, here's the cruel twist. The NBA just changed the lottery rules that same season, flattening the worst team odds from a guaranteed 25% down to just 14, significantly to discourage tanking. The year the Knicks finally fully commit to bottoming out is the first year the Knicks make bottoming out less rewarding. Lottery night comes, New Orleans wins, Zion's a Pelican. The Knicks falls to the third pick. They didn't just lose the lottery, they lost the lottery during the 1 year they actually tried to lose on purpose. Failing at failing. But the front office had a backup plan. Clear max space for 2 superstars in free agency. Targeting 2 names, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. They even acquired DeAndre Jordan, a close personal friend of Kevin Durant, as recruiting bait. Owner James Dolan goes on ESPN radio that March and say, quote, he expects a very successful offseason. Free agency open, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving both signed with the Brooklyn Nets. The team across the river in the same city, sharing the same airspace, the same back pages, the same back of the cab conversation. And both of them take slightly less max money so DeAndre Jordan can join them too. The recruiting tool the Knicks built to land Kevin Durant ends up walking to Brooklyn with them. Years later, Durant explained why playing. The team was not cool to play for. It wasn't a good team to watch. Kyrie was even more direct about how close it actually came. They had a good chance getting us back, but we just felt like we wanted to build here. Part of Kyrie's pull towards Brooklyn was personal. He grew up in New Jersey where the Nets used to play, and he lobbied Durant to go with him. So in the span of 1 calendar year, the Knicks tanked on purpose, still didn't get the prize, and then watched 2 superstars chose their crosstown rival, partly recruited there by a guy who used to live 10 minutes from the building the Nets used to play in. The consolation prize? Julius Randle, Bobby Portis, Taj Gibson, and Reggie Bullock. Solid players, not the plan. That's the year everything finally broke. Not the losing. The Knicks were used to losing. It's that they tried 2 different paths to fix it in the same 12 months, and both of them failed in front of the entire basketball world. That's rock bottom. And rock bottom, it turns out, is exactly what the organization needed. No banner, no press conference fanfare, no we promise this time is different speech. James Dolan does something he never really done before. He stepped back and hired actual basketball people to run basketball decisions. He brings in Leon Rose and William Wesley, 2 former CAA agents, to take over the front office. Remember that name, Leon Rose? The same man who sat across from Phil Jackson during the slow death of the Melo era. The agent watching the Knicks mishandle his own client for 3 years straight is now the man running the team. The guy who saw exactly how this organization broke its last superstar is now in charge, making sure it never happens again. That's not a coincidence you can write better than real life. Rose and Wesley first move, hired their own former client, Tom Thibodeau, as head coach. Quiet, unspectacular, almost boring by Knicks standards, which for this franchise was revolutionary. Because the old Knicks always tried to win the back page. The new Knicks started trying to just win games. Now it's the 2022 free agency. Jalen Brunson, a backup turn starter who just helped Dallas reach the Western Conference Finals, signs a 4-year, $104 million deal with the Knicks. And the reaction across the league is brutal. Overpay, reach, and inexperienced front office game played by a smart agent. Dallas could have kept him. Owner Mark Cuban later admitted himself, we had to see what he would become. Dallas offered 4 years at $55 million before the deadline. Brunson kept reportedly last. Here's what most outside world miss. Brunson's father, Rick Brunson, was already on the Knicks coaching staff. This wasn't just a max contract, it was spending. And sometimes the moves that look like overpay on paper are actually just somebody finally betting on the right relationship instead of the biggest name. Brunson comes to New York and turns into exactly what nobody outside the building believed he could be. An all-NBA engine, a fourth quarter killer, the first real building block the Knicks have found organically since Patrick Ewing. Now the front office does something the old Knicks never had discipline to do. They build around their actual identity instead of chasing the shining next name. In 2023, they traded for OG Anunoby, a two-way wing, not flashy, just exactly what the roster needed. In 2024, they go even further. They traded for Mikal Bridges, sending Brooklyn an absolutely jaw-dropping package, 4 unprotected first-round picks, a pick swap, and an extra first-round pick from Milwaukee. 5 first-round picks in total for a non-all-star, tied with the Paul George trade for the most draft capital ever sent in a single deal. The NBA world calls it insane, reckless, the kind of move that sets a franchise back a decade. The Knicks fans had flashback to Eddy Curry trade so fast you could practically hear the group trauma response. Then weeks later, they traded Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo, who was the 4th member of their Villanova core, along with Brunson, Josh Hart, and Bridges. But they decided to trade Donte DiVincenzo and Julius Randle for Karl-Anthony Towns. The front office was reportedly crushed about losing DiVincenzo because this wasn't just a transaction, it was a roster built on actual relationships. Guys who won championships together at Villanova as college kids, brought back together a decade later. So now the Knicks have given up a mountain of future picks, a beloved role player, and a fan favorite, all in 12 months. And the discord is brutal. Worst trade in modern NBA history. They mortgaged the franchise. But here's what nobody saw yet. They didn't just collect talent. They built a defense. Anunoby and Bridges, 2 elite on-ball defenders, taking turns locking up the best perimeter scorer on every opposing roster. Towns transforming into a stretch 5 who could finally space the floor in a way New York had never had at the position. The old Knicks chased stars for the name on the jersey. This front office built infrastructure. That's the difference. But building it right doesn't mean it comes easy. Because for 2 years straight, one team stood directly in the Knicks' path, the Indiana Pacers. 2024, second round, Game 7, Knicks dealing with injuries up and down the roster. Brunson literally's playing through a broken finger, and they fall 130 to 109 at home. 2025, they make it further. The Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in 25 years. And then comes one of the most painful collapses in recent playoff history. Game 1 at home, they blow a 14-point lead in overtime. Game 2, they lose again at home. No team in NBA history had ever lost the first 2 games at home in the conference finals and come back to win the series. The Knicks becomes the latest team to not be the exception. They lose in 6, season over. And for a franchise with this much history of heartbreak, that loss could have been just another entry in the ledger. Another chapter in the same entire book. Except this time, instead of repeating this cycle, the front office made a decision that, on surface, looked completely insane. Days after the Pacers collapsed, the Knicks fired Tom Thibodeau, the same coach who just led them to their first Eastern Conference in a quarter century, a 2-time Coach of the Year, a guy who'd been with the franchise and helped build the culture that got them this far. The league is stunned. Players are reportedly divided. Karl-Anthony Towns said publicly he didn't want the instability of another coaching change. So, who do they hire? Mike Brown, a coach who has been fired by Sacramento Kings just months earlier. A guy who, in his own words, accepted he might never get another head coaching job in this league. The Knicks essentially looked at a coach who just been let go by another team and say, yeah, him. Bold strategy for a franchise with a particular history. But here's what the outside world didn't know. League sources later revealed New York wanted a collaborator, someone willing to lean on his assistant instead of wanting a one-man show. A departure from a dictatorship model to something closer to a partnership. Brown takes over. He revamps Karl-Anthony Towns' offensive role. He modernized a stagnant offense. The Knicks jumped from 20th in the league in three-point attempts rate all the way to 12th. He spread the workflow so no single player is grinding through 38 minutes a night by February. In his very first season, He leads the Knicks to 53 wins, their best finish since the Melo years, and the best finish before that, the Young era, and into that franchise's first NBA Finals appearance since 1999. San Antonio Spurs, the 2026 NBA Finals. And what happens over these 5 games might be the most clutch championship series in modern basketball history. Every single game decided by 5 points or fewer in the final 5 minutes. The only series like it in 30 years of tracked data. Sorry, let me set the tone. Game 4 at Madison Square Garden. Up 2-1, losing game 3 at home a couple days before, at risk of going back to San Antonio tied 2-2. Knicks fall behind 29 points. 29. And somehow, impossibly, they claw all the way back and win. At one point, Spurs fans was measuring the parade route, and New York said, not yet. This wasn't a team running over an overmatched opponent. This was 5 straight nights of staring down elimination and refusing to blink. Game 5, closeout game. Jalen Brunson, the overpay, the guy Dallas let walk for nothing, drops 45 points and locks up the unanimous Finals MVP. And in the final seconds, as the clock runs down, Brunson finds his father, Rick, the same man who was on staff when his son signed an overpaid deal 4 years earlier, and the two of them break down together on the floor of the arena. Josh Hart grabs the mic during the trophy celebration and says what every Knicks fan in the building was thinking about every trade, every mock pick they gave away. Forget them picks, dog. We here. Mike Brown, fired by Sacramento 18 months earlier, written off a guy who might never coach again, is now a 5-time NBA champion. Only the second Knicks coach in history to win it all, joining Red Holzman. 53 years, and it's finally over.
So, how did it actually happen? Because for 53 years, this organization tried every shortcut in the book. They traded for stars before they were ready to build around them. That was Eddy Curry. They signed superstars to contracts so suffocating, they trapped the very team that gave them out. That was Melo in the no-trade clause. They tanked for a generational talent and lost the lie on a technicality of bad timing. That was Zion. They built a recruiting pitch so good, it recruited their own guy to the other team. That was Durant and Kyrie walking to Brooklyn. For a half century, this was a franchise that kept reaching for the loud answer, the splash, the headline, the thing that would look good on the back page tomorrow morning instead of the thing that would actually win a championship 5 years from now. But somewhere in 2020, something shifted. They stopped hiring legends and started hiring builders. They stopped chasing the biggest name in the room and started chasing the right fit for the room they already had. They bet on a backup guard nobody believed in because the front office actually knew his family, actually trusted the person and not just the stat line. They surrounded him with defenders instead of just scorers, with OG Anunoby, with Mikal Bridges, two-way players who made the whole team harder to play against, even when the box score didn't show it. They gave up picks that made the entire league laugh at them and turned those picks into infrastructure instead of headlines. They traded away beloved teammates even when it crushed the people making decisions because they trusted that the fit matters more than the feeling. And then when the team finally broke through the conference finals and still came up short, they did the hardest thing a franchise can do. They didn't panic. They didn't blow up. They made one uncomfortable change. They fired a coach for a better fit. They bet on a man everyone else has already given up. And somehow, all of that stacked together. The right point guard, the right wings, the right big man, the right coach at the exactly right moment. 5 games, all within 5 points against a team that wouldn't go away. And a roster that, for the first time in over half a century, didn't blink. That's it. That's the answer. Not luck, not the miracle lottery, not a star walking through the door because the brand was cool. Discipline, fit, and patience, and the willingness to be doubted by literally everyone, the fans, the media, even some of their own locker room, and still stayed the course anyway. For 53 years, the New York Knicks was the league's greatest case study in almost won with Melo, almost got Zion, almost got Durant and Kyrie, almost broke through against Indiana, and then finally, they stopped being almost, because it turns out the secret was never about finding magic. It was about finally building something real, brick by brick, tray by tray, doubted decisions by doubted decision, until one day in June, all of it turned into a parade down the Canyon of Heroes. So if you're out there working on something that everybody else thinks is a mistake, if you're betting on the people instead of headlines, if you're doing the boring, unglamorous, doubted work instead of chasing the loud answer, stay with it. Because sometimes almost isn't the ending. Sometimes it's just the chapter right before the parade.
We really did it, dog.